All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm gonna try and do a few videos on code-related problems I encounter. Sorry, this is me typing because I realize things I'm not really ready for what I want to do. I'm gonna be rambling a bit. The very first of such videos I'm gonna make. It may not be perfect. Sorry about that. So the idea is that I do a few videos on code-related problems I encounter, the solutions I find for them, and make those videos where I talk about them, essentially. So yeah, the first thing I want to talk about here in this video is dealing with dynamic Shiny inputs. The Shiny Web Framework's input system is very much sort of ID-based, if that's a thing. And by that I mean every input takes an ID, which is an ID that makes its way into the DOM. So it's very difficult to dynamically generate inputs and then observe on them. It's for reasons unbeknownst to me something I've encountered quite frequently in the past year or so. And I have a solution that I use quite frequently, or at least what I will show you is a version of that. The idea is simply, well, to use very little Shiny for it and to instead leverage JavaScript for all of this, because it is, at least in my opinion, much more handy in doing this. It was, well, sort of designed with these sort of things in mind, so it makes it easier. What I'm going to do is share my screen if I can find the button. Yes, here we are. So I have a project here. Let me zoom in on this. It's currently private. Hopefully I'll remember to make this public by the time I release the video. And it's a basic Shiny application where the underlying data is randomly generated in such a way that at development time, what we're going to do right now, there's no way of knowing what inputs we actually have to generate. We have some information on this, but not all. And that makes things very tricky. So I'll show you the solutions that I've come up with and walk you through the little project that I have here. So app.r, and that's basically what we have. 36 lines of code, not much going on. This basic setup so that we can have a little script here, currently empty. We'll fill that in. And the ID is, if I run this, we have a button, randomize, and if I click on it, nothing happens. Currently, nothing happens. In the backend, what we do is we generate random data, and I think that's the most crucial bit to walk you through. There's a script data.r that contains a function that will generate this data randomly for us. The way the data is structured is, in a sense, something that I see very frequently, where we have, broadly, the idea is we have a certain number of records that's totally random again. We don't know how many records will be made available to the app at runtime. And within each of these records, there are a certain number of variables, values, call it what you want, which we want the user to be able to edit and interact with. Again, we don't know what these inputs, what these value variables that translate ultimately to inputs are at development time. The script is here, and I've simplified it somewhat from what's available in the GitHub repository to keep this video slightly shorter. We can generate any number of records, and in those records can be any number of values, variables that we want to make editable. These fall into two broad categories. We have text and number. So a text value will probably be a text input, a numeric value, we'll see what we do, a range input, a numeric input, whatever. Together with this, when we generate these values, we have, well, a default value, default value for the input, so we have something to generate. So if I'll show you a bit of how that works, we have this function called make data. This time it generated 34 records. If I run it again, 20, 20 again, and so on. So we don't know how many records will be generated. Then, if you look at the first element, first record that's generated, here we have a single value, single input. And again, this time we have 2, this time we have 4, etc. So if we explore this a bit more and we look at the structure of the first record, we see essentially a list of lists that contain one of these two lists. So the first is an input number, a number with a value of 47, then text with gibberish, and so on. Now the idea is that we generate this data in Shiny here in the application. We have the action button update with the label randomize that I showed you before. When we click on it, we run this observe event is being triggered, and we create data that we send to the client, the web browser. And here, once we have this data in the client, we'll have to generate the inputs from it. I think the best thing to do first is to write a little script where we're going to simply log the data that's being sent to the client. It's useful to see how that data looks like on the client side, which is going to be JSON. And it's also the browser and the console here is vastly more, in my mind, to me at least, clearer than what we see here in the console. So if you're not aware of this method here on the session object, we send a custom message. We give the message I think it's the argument is type. It's technically a unique identifier, if you like. So that we send that to the client, and in the client we can pick up on that message being sent, react on it, do something with it. So dataset in is what we send. So here I'll just add a custom message handler for dataset in. That's going to take a callback function, which is just going to accept the message, which is what we send from the server. And currently I'm just going to console log the data that is within that message. If I go back to the application, you can see that the message is this list, and what I'm interested in is the data within it. So just like that, we should have enough to run the application and observe something here. So currently we don't see anything, but normally when I click this randomize button, it should trigger this here observe event, which sends the message dataset in with the random data, arrives here, and we log it to the console here. Click it once, that's what we see. So an array of 35 can translate that in R to a vector list of length 35. 35 records were generated. Click again, 29. Now if I expand this, let me make this bigger, like so. I'll do maybe even a bit bigger. All right. First record is again a list, an array that contains 4 of these values inputs that we have to create, and which we can see here, their type and the default value. My idea for this is that for each of these records, we generate a card, and within each of these cards, we'll generate those inputs. If you look at the application, I'm using here Bootstrap 5, thanks to pslib. So we can go on the documentation for Bootstrap 5 components card. This is what I want to generate. So each record will be in a simple card like this. How are we going to go about this? Let me see if I can make this dark. Too bright. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that I'm going to call make records plural. I'm going to take dot records, and in there what we're going to do is very similar to stuff we do in R with basic functional programming. Records, we're going to map over it, and that's very similar to what we would do with per map. We can map over letters, or let's map over 1 to 9, and then we're gonna just add one to each of these. So just start at 2. Yeah. The per map function is very similar to in JavaScript map. It takes an array and spits out an array of the same length as the input. So here it's a method on record, and what I'm going to take, I'm going to pass that call back that function. It's going to be run on every array, every element of the array. Sorry. So the first element is going to be record singular. We have a single record, and what I'm going to add is the index, so that we know where we are in the loop. Again, let me go back to the R. If you're in R here, you can use the IMAP function, and then you're going to get as a second argument the index. I can just return the index. So if I go, I'll make it more explicit. If I loop over letters, I pass in the letters, the letter of X. I is the index. I don't do anything with the letter. We go down to 1 to 26. Same thing here. Why do we do this? Because we want to be able, because once we have generated all these records in the form of cards and all these values in the form of inputs, when users change the values of certain inputs, we want to be able to take those values and send it back to the server, along with some context. As in, we need to know which input of which record was changed. The index is a convenient way of keeping track of that, so that when later we'll do at the end of this video, when an input is being changed by the user, we can send back together with the new value the index of the record and the index of the input, because likely what you want to do server side is I don't know, update a database. That depends on, based on this, whatever it is that you want to do, but you're probably going to need this context. So we're going to do this. Sorry, so we're going to have another function called make record, which is going to take these two inputs and it's going to create the very card that we want. So before I move on to that function, again, I did it. Let's make record singular, a function that doesn't exist yet. In JavaScript, you have to make sure you use your return keyword, otherwise the function doesn't return anything. Good to do. Most programming languages will ask you to explicitly use the return keyword. To the best of my knowledge, R is one of the few languages that allow you to omit it. Now, again, like I said, map is going to return an array of the same length. But here I don't want an array. What I'm going to generate from make record R is basically HTML in the form of a string. So here I can just collapse that with the join method. That way the array is collapsed into a single string. Now, what I want to do here is create this function called make record, which takes a record and I can type it correctly, an index. Again, it's going to return, what is it going to return? Well, this here. Right, not too shabby. So what we have to do is in the card, which represents the record on the client side, I'm going to add a data attribute to keep track of the index, like so. What I think we can do is have a nice little card title here. We don't really have a title for the record, for each record that we have, but maybe we can just show, the index that we're in. Which will give you an opportunity to talk about something else. While I'm at it, I might as well, I'm using those, explain a bit more. Those backticks that I'm using is for, what do you call it again, string interpolation. It's a bit what we have now in R with glue. Allows you to nicely construct strings. So here I'm pretty good, although the make records function is not being called. So Make records is going to loop over all these records. These records is every time we run this function, which returns a card. The card doesn't have much, but we'll leave it at that for just now. However, the idea is that now I'm going to have a string with all these divs, and I need to put it somewhere in the app. I need what generally I think is referred to as an anchor, if you like. And this is what I have here. It's an empty div. I gave it a specific width. It's going to take too much space on the screen. So we have a specific div where we can place that. I'm going to do this here. Again, convenient JavaScript, jQuery rather, app. We're going to place some HTML. We're going to call make records to which we pass the data. This should do. One thing I'm going to do quickly, in Bootstrap 5 there are some convenient little utility functions to add padding and change font size and stuff like that. And here I'm going to use MB for margin bottom, -2 for things to EM or REM. It's going to put a bit of margin at the bottom of each card, otherwise they were going to get stuck to one another. So with this, if I run it, now we see the cards. And interestingly, that's what I want to show you. In R vectors iteration, everything starts at 1. In most programming languages like JavaScript, it starts at 0. Hence, we have record 0 here. These are all our cards. And if I click again, it should re-render stuff. You don't see much changing other than the scroll bar becomes longer or shorter. But this is a decent start. Now we generate all the cards for each record. Now what I want to do is in here, I should create the inputs. So we're going to have another function inputs. Let me open this so that I can explain again what we're doing. So make this bigger. Yeah. So make records loop over this entire array of 26. So it generates 26 cards. Yes. And then once we're at the level of the record, here we have an array again. So I need to do the same thing again. So make inputs is going to take a record, and I need to pass it to index. It's just going to take a record, and in there again, no, make inputs is going to take another array. I'm going to need inputs, and again we're going to do what we did before. Inputs map. I'm going to map over it. Input index. Again, I'm going to keep the index so that I know ultimately which input is being changed. And in here, what do we have to do? I'm going to follow the same paradigm I've been using so far. I'm going to use make input. I'm going to pass it the input and the index. Again, not forgetting my return word. What does make input have to do? Well, make input now receives one of these objects that has either a type of text or number. So input index. What I want to do is switch over the input type, and depending on the input type that I have, generate an input. So if this is like this, I'm going to return make input text. What this function should take? Well, it should take the type. I don't need a specific function for that. We should take the value and the index. So I can put input dot value index. We'll start with this. We can do the number later. With that function make input text, it's taking the value and index, and again we're going to return here an input. If I go back to Bootstrap, I think they have forms. I think it's going to be under form control. It's basic text input, but there is a specific class that I want. So here, this is going to be an input, like so, with this class. And then what I want to do is I'm going to first add the data attribute index again, which I want to keep track of. You can see the index of it. The value I can set as well to 1. And unless I'm mistaken here, normally if I generate, we run the app again. No, it's not going to work for a simple reason. I have this nice make inputs function, but I'm not calling it anywhere. I want to call it here below, make inputs, and it takes the record like so. Now this should work. Randomize. So some cards map here blank. This one probably only has numeric inputs with number, type number. The rest works, and these are inputs that do. Can I edit them? But nothing happens, nothing's being sent to the server. I'm going to use that same convenience class here to put some margin. There is some spacing between these. Now what we have to do is very simple. We're going to do the next one. Number, I'm going to return make inputs, number inputs, what value and the index. We start back here, const make input number, input value and the index. And again, we're going to return. I don't want to do a numeric input, it's a bit boring. Let's do a range so that we have a nice slider. It's not as nice as what you have out of the box with Shiny because it doesn't display the value, current value this range here has, so that can be remedied too. And then I can copy what I have here because again for this input also we want to keep track of the index and I want to set the default value. Now if I run this, and what am I taking? In this class, so that looks a bit nicer. Now it should be closer to what we have. So first record has 4 numeric inputs. Here, second 2 numeric inputs. Here we see a mix of a bit of everything. So we're not in a bad place already. We've got that generated. Now when the user interacts with this, we have to send that value back to the server. And that's where I think, at least in my mind, JavaScript becomes really handy. I'm sure I killed the server. Let me rerun that. In Shiny, each of these would normally bear an ID. Here I don't have any ID on these inputs. There's no need for it. And because in Shiny, because it's all ID based, I would have to dynamically generate observers for each of these inputs. And that makes the server code, at least to me, slightly too nasty for my liking. So what I want to do here is use JavaScript because I can have a single observer for each of these. And this word of warning is some huge shortcut that I take here for this video to keep things short. Ideally, you'd want those observers to be a lot more custom, and we'll see a bit more about what I mean here. So once I've created the records and placed them into the application here, what I want to do is I'm going to create a function called bind event, which will bind those events, which will have bind the observers, if you like, over this. It doesn't take any argument. When we use jQuery here, now I want to, like I said, massive shortcut, create one observer for each of these. I could just observe on input, but I'm not going to do that. It's a bit too much of a shortcut. What I can do is assign these a common class, because unlike IDs, they don't have to be unique. So each of these, all the inputs will have the class input, and in here I can just observe on input. So when the input changes, and I always get confused myself on what you need to pick up for text, but any key will be picked up, and we'll have this function here react. And this is again, here you'd have to debounce, do stuff like that. I'm not going to do this here to keep things short. But yeah, keep that in mind. So what do we do here? First, just to show you how it works, we can console.event is not even a thing. Console.log event dot, and I'm going to take the target. So every time an object with a class input changes or has a keystroke, if you like, this function will be triggered. Event is an object from JavaScript that contains information about, well, what it is that's exactly happening, the event itself, and it contains target, which is the element in question. So if I log it, we should see this element being logged to the console. So open the console, randomize, we see this, and now if I move this, yeah, and you can see that if I hover, this is this input. I'm going to change this one. If I hover it, you can see the input, the relevant input highlighted. Now this is useful because then using this, I can pick up the new value, pick up the indices that I placed in various places here. So this is going to be my element, and what we're going to do is create an object with all the data that we want to send back to the server. So the value is going to be, we're going to take the value just like that. Then what we need to do is we take the input index, and for that I can just use this, and here I take the index. This is taking the data attribute index, which I have here. Data attribute index is going to take this value. Then I have to take the record index. So for this, I can do again the brilliance of jQuery. With closest, I'm going to go back up the tree. Say this input is being changed. I'm going to find the closest card class, which is going to move me up here, and here I can take the data index again. Data index, and like so, you should have a neat object. Then again, I'm just going to take baby steps. We're just going to log so that we get a bit more context and we understand a bit more what's happening. Again, open this console, click randomize, we log this. If I move this, we should see record index 0 and input index 1. Or we don't, and we get an error, which is good too. Yeah, it's not good here, but I have to use jQuery. Let's do that again. Console, randomize, we log this. So this is record 2, input 0. Record 2, input 0. And the value is bin max to 100. That's the default. I can move it back to 0, value of 0. So that's good. So now we have this value here being logged, and we're not doing anything with it. So what I want to do is send it back to the server. Now I'm going to use set input value from Shiny. I'm going to define the name of the input. I'm going to put it in data set out. Not that a good name for an input. Oh well. What that does is going to send it back through the WebSocket back to the server where I can observe on it, and it's going to define an input just like you know. However, there are some caveats that I'm going to discuss shortly. So I named the data set out, and here for now at least I'm going to print data set. Let's rerun the application here. Now randomize, we have the data. Now if I change something here, we'll see it sent server side. Yeah. Now, few things. First, this input. We use set input value. Technically, it's not really an input. It's gonna burn. Some stuff's not gonna work. It's not an input that you can update from the server side like you do. You need to update text area input, update something. It's not an input that you're going to be able to update like that. And it's not an input that's going to be picked up by the bookmarking if you use that. There may be other issues, but these are the two main ones that people have pointed out with this solution. Another thing is, this is on purpose, only played with the sliders, because there's no problem here with our observer here, but the key up is actual madness. It's really not something I should be doing. You'll notice in a classic text input in Shiny, when you type, it debounces, it waits a certain milliseconds without any activity on the input, and then sends that value here. We have key up, so every single stroke would be sent to the server. That's a bit too much. So I deleted it, so you keep your eye on this value. If I type a letter, A, B, C, D, so I send too much value. This is being sent as type, and this is way too much. It's way overkill. That's probably not what you want to do. But for this example, I think it does the job. Now the idea is with the index, when the indices that you have here, you can easily, if I had a reactive, I could do data index something, the other index that I had, take the value and update that with whatever I get from the input. That's the idea. So this is how I go about it. Hopefully I get this video online soon, and I'll remember to make the repository public, but this is generally how I go about it. And it's pretty elegant because it doesn't require you to learn a specific web framework or anything. It does all of this with what comes out of the box with Shiny. So it's very good. Now I'm going to share my screen again briefly just to show another big shortcut that I take that really I should not do, but it's the nature of this example. Here at the button randomize, and I click randomize. Data is being sent here, and I recreate all the records. This is a bit crazy. We make a big update on the DOM, on the document. Everything that's in app here is being updated here, and every time I'm going to click randomize, it's going to squash all of that. It's a bit too much. Depending on how much data you have, it's really not elegant. Again, in the real world, normally you don't have a randomize button and data is not randomized. As the new data comes in, you can selectively update certain inputs or certain records, and you don't squash everything like I do here. So I think this is it. I'll leave it at that. Thank you for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.